Hello guys, I am going to show you how I implemented a grid object system in my game Bunny Bouquet, right? Free to play on itch.io, in order so you can move and interact with objects on a grid. I'll show you how it's made, and you can, learn from this. It's a pretty useful system for doing any sort of grid-based movement, interaction, and of the sorts. So my system lets me pick up objects, place them down, and then it also lets me do special interactions. So if I'm already carrying another object, right? So if I'm carrying a pot, right? I can't interact with a pot, and another pot doesn't do anything. So the pot is an interactable object in of itself, right? And it's able to read, hey, I'm holding something that can do an interaction with it right now. Like, right? I can't water the soil right now because it needs some seeds in there. Why does it need seeds in there? Because watering it acts as a confirmation of I want to grow the current plant, right? Because this game is a recipe-based game where you can combine multiple seeds. So for example, if I flour one pot with red and another pot with red, and I put yellow in one and not the other, and I water both, we'll end up creating a different flower actually, right? One will be red, one will be yellow. And what's cool about that is this is how the system for the entire game works. You see the tile that came down at the beginning says one red. So if we put the one red on there, right, it will complete that tile and we will get to the next stage, right? So for example, if I put this orange one on, right, it won't do anything, right? And the way this grid system works, right, is using this code I wrote below. And here we have this tween duration to ideal pose. So what that means is the object without tweening, right, would just instantly teleport. Like all of my grid objects would just instantly teleport where they actually are on the grid. But in order to make the game flow better, feel nicer to play, not feel like it's just everything on a grid teleporting like a really old game that doesn't have, that's just like pure grid interaction, like a Minesweeper, right? If we wanted to actually have like an animated, right? Because you see in the game, stuff moves around pretty smoothly, right? So we have this tween duration, so stuff don't instantly teleport to where they are on the grid, right? And it also, what's it called? On an object, you can have one interactable. So you have another component that's interactable, right? Say it's like a carryable or something that, as long as somewhere down the chain, it implements this interactable, right? We can get a reference to it, and then you can interact, right? If you interact with that grid, the object of this grid, it'll call this function, and it'll see like, hey, if this thing is interactable, let's interact with it. And you're like, wait, why would it not have an interactable, right? These bushes do not have an interactable. Nothing you do can interact with it, right? So these game objects, or these prefabs, I can show you here. These prefabs, right? They don't have anything. It's just the grid object, right? But for example, our clay pot, it has the grid object, but it also has the flower pot, right? This flower pot script is inheriting of the carryable, right? And you're like, okay, the carryable, as you can see, implements the interactable, right? So the flower pot is a carryable, right? Because as you see, like, wait, that sounds complicated. Well, okay, this flower pot, you can carry it. That's all it's saying. Is like, hey, you can carry this object, right? And you can also interact with it. Like, what do you mean you can interact with it? Well, I can carry the pot, and I could also interact with it. That's what it's saying in the code. I could interact. I could put the soil in there, right? I've interacted with it, right? I could put a seed in there. It's another interaction, right? I could put the water in there, right? But you're like, wait a minute, you're interacting with it in different ways each time. How does it handle having different interactions? Well, since I'm in this flower pot class, right? So everything you interact with can have some different response. Like turning on a radio should turn on music, right? Everything that you can interact with, right, has its own implementation, right? So ultimately, the derived class will take care of what the specific implementation is, right? This just happens to be also carryable. And like, why does carryable automatically do interactable, right? Because picking up and carrying something is an interaction in of itself, right? So the flower, right, it has the dictionary of the seed requirements, meaning that whenever you put seeds in here, it will store the dictionary of what seeds are put in here and how many of each seed is inside of the plant, right? So that we know what flower to grow whenever we water it. This flower, right, just lets us get a reference to the flower that grows once we water. Like when we water the plant, whatever recipe it ends up being for the seeds that we put in, it will whenever we water the plant, it'll get a instance of a planted flower, and you can get the reference to it here, right? And I also have this event of when the plant has finished growing, right? Because it's not instant, as you saw. We also run a little state machine here of keeping track of what the flower pot state is, right? Useful stuff. And we can get the flower's name. This is just a little utility function, right? It just gets the planetflower.name, right? And I use the name of the flower in order to know what flower it is, right? If it's like a red flower here, right, the red tulip, right, it'll know because this blue one, this recipe says that the flower that should be created from this is a blue tulip, not a red tulip, so it doesn't do anything, right? But if I go and I plant myself a blue tulip, right, right, when it does defend. By the way, and I could put it on here and it'll actually be able to tell. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. And I could take it off and put it back on. So, pretty good code, right? It'll tell that it's the blue tulip by the name of the flower, right? That's why it uses this flower name. And it also keeps track of the state. Whatever. I could probably put that above, but who cares? The play interaction particles, right? So you're like, what do you mean play interaction particles? So whenever I interact with a clay pot, right, whether it be the soil or the water, there are some particles that come out and it shakes a little bit, right? If I plant a seed in it, it'll do the same thing of like, see, I put it in, particles come out and it shakes. Boom, right? I water, same thing. Particles come out and it shakes, right? Each of those times, it's still doing the same thing with the only difference being the color of the particles, right? So over here, right, I just save references to what colors are for each interaction for the particle system, right? So whenever I interact with it, I will just set the colors to, whatever I send it as the parameter. So if I'm doing, for example, a water, right, interaction, then it will play it with the watercolors, the ones I've inside from the inspector. And like, where can I see that, right? I'll give you a visual example. So over here on the clay pot, I have the dirt colors. Right? I could pull it up. I have the dirt colors, the plant colors, and the water colors. So these is like the two colors that will spurt out from the particle system whenever I put soil in the pot. These are the colors that come out whenever I plant seed in the pot. And then these are the colors that come out whenever I water the pot. And then I also have these little hooks in here so I can just play the different audio clips, right? Because the pot handles the different audio clips. Meaning like whenever you plant the seed, whenever you water the pot, whenever you fill dirt, whenever it finishes growing, it'll play those different clips. So like, for example, let's see, you can hear the audio. So it plays the dirt sound when you put the soil in, and it plays the seed sound, right, when you put a seed in, and then it will, maybe fill the water there, it'll play the water sound with the water in, and then it'll play the flower finished growing sound when the flower finishes growing, right, little yellow tulip, really nice. And from there, right, we can, just set it to play the interaction based on what interaction this is, right? And the interactions are all contextual. And like, what do I mean by that? So if I go over to the interact, right, it'll first check, like, all right, are we carrying something? And if not, we're just going to carry the pot, right? Because we can't interact with the pot if we're not carrying anything, but we can carry it, right? If we're not carrying something else, right? There's no seeds to put in, right? We'll just carry the pot then instead, right? So like, for example, if I have nothing in me, like if I have the water, I can't do anything. I can't carry the pot if I'm already carrying something, right? That's what that code's saying. But if I'm not carrying something, then I just pick it up. That is the contextual interaction, right? And then otherwise, if I can fill dirt, I'll fill the dirt. And if I can water the plant, I'll water the plant. And if I can plant the seeds, I'll plant the seeds, right? And it does it in that order, right, based on what you have. So you can really only do one. And then otherwise, right, if I can't do any of these interactions, then that means whatever I'm trying to do is not valid, right? And it'll just do the block new carry. And what that means is it'll just get the block new carry will tell whatever I'm carrying to just shake. So whenever I do this, like I can't water this plant, it's already watered. It'll just shake it, right? That's what the block new carry is with the interaction system. And then the can interact is just saying, okay, are we, so the reason why I also have this can interact, right? So if I go to the I interact, well, I interact here, right? It only has two functions. It has the interact and the can interact. And the reason why I have both, you're like, why not just have the only interact, right? Notice how whenever I grab the water and I hover over it, the E does not pop out, right? So it checks every time the rabbit moves, because I don't need to check per frame, right? Like a coder who's not as experienced will just check every frame, right? Since I'm doing grid-based movement, I really only need to check whenever I've moved, right? And the movement includes a rotation, right? So it only needs to check when I've moved, and it only needs to check after I've picked up an item. So the E goes away after I pick it up because I picked it up and it's checked and there's nothing in front of me to interact with, right? Same thing goes to the water. I've moved here and the E doesn't pop up because it realizes like, hey, I cannot interact. It's run this can interact code. It's called it on the flower pot and it's realized, hey, no, it is carrying an item. So return this, it's not carrying an item. Well, it is carrying an item. It can't fill the dirt because I don't have dirt. It can't water the plant because it's already watered. It can't plant the seeds, right? It can't do anything to these things because it's already done. The only thing I can do is pick it up. It's the only interaction that's valid on it, right? And that system allows me to only have the E pop up when it should, right? And that's about it for the interaction system. The flower pot itself, right? It just checks its state for if it can do stuff. So, for example, I handle the can water plant. I check. Okay, is it a seedling, right? Meaning that there is a seed in here, right? And I check. Okay, do you have a water pot? And is the mount in the water pot over 0, right? And then technically the water pot inherits from consumable because it's one of the consumable items, right? You're like, what else is consumable, right? The soil is consumable, the seeds are consumable, and the water is consumable, right? It'll drain after each usage, and some consumables, right? I'll go to the code. Consumable. Some consumables, right, will destroy on empty. Right, the water ball doesn't. If it's like the seeds or the soil, right, and then it will call the destruction event and it'll destroy itself, right? And if it's not, it will, I throw this error, right? So I don't let you consume if there's nothing in it, right? And I don't want to ever call this code if there's nothing in it. And then I have the refill, of course, for like something like the water. Right, you can refill the water from the well, and that just calls this code, right? And it allows you to interact with it. So back to the flower pot, right? This will only return true if you can water the plant, right? This will only return true if you can fill the dirt, and this will only return true if you can plant the seeds. Therefore, making it so I can check all these conditions in the interact code to see like, hey, if I can do any interaction, do it, and if I can do any interaction, like just say I can do the interaction, let me know. Right, so then I could pop up the little E indicator, right? Really useful stuff. And that is how the flower pot and interactable system works. Thanks for watching.